Okay, we're going to talk about the macromolecules that you learned a little bit about as you started looking at the macros that are in the foods that you eat, and we'll do some more work with that later on after we talk a little bit more about enzymes. So I have this video here that I'd like for you to go ahead and watch. So you can pause this video and then go watch the other video on biomolecules from the Amoeba Sisters. They just have this way of taking things and breaking them down. And they also include some really nice illustrations. So make sure that you go look at this video. The four macromolecules are carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now, as you were looking over macros for your food, you focus just on the carbs and the lipids and the proteins. So the nucleic acids weren't addressed at all. So we will talk about them as we go through this section. So with carbohydrates, and I do have a link here that will take you to a little video from your online textbook about carbohydrates or carbs. But basically, we're talking about sugars and starches. So that's commonly what people know about carbohydrates. Carbs are sugars, carbs are starches. Now, when we're talking about these macromolecules, macromolecule, we're talking about a large molecule. And large molecules are made from smaller pieces. And these smaller pieces are called monomers. And one of the things that you should take away from this section are the monomers or the building blocks of the macromolecules. So when you're talking about carbs, the monomers or building blocks are called monosaccharides. And it's a big, huge word, but literally it means one sugar. That's all that it means when you break that down. Now we'll talk about the functions. So you should also have a basic idea of what each of these macros do. And when you're talking about carbs, the big function when it comes to carbs is providing energy for our cells. Now what you're looking at here is glucose, and glucose is going to be your main monosaccharide, your main carb that you will need to know this year. So glucose, or C6H12O6, is what we use to make energy. So when I eat a carbohydrate, I don't automatically have energy. It's going to go through our digestive system, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then whatever I'm eating is probably a bigger carbohydrate, and my body has to break it down into individual glucose molecules. And then they go through an additional processing called respiration or cellular respiration. And then that transforms the glucose into a usable form that we can use in our bodies to keep us alive. And that form is called ATP. And we'll talk more about that process of respiration when we get to our energy unit. Okay, other things that are associated with carbohydrates are storage of energy on a short-term basis. And when you talk about storage of energy, the main storage molecule that people talk about is starch, like starchy vegetables. Here's my favorite example of a starchy vegetable. I do like the potato. You may like the corn, or maybe we all like both of them. But starch is the way that plants have to store up some energy for use later on. So some people who are maybe dieting, so this is kind of the section where we talk a little bit of what kind of makes sense is the science behind some diets. But people will stay away from things that are starches or starchy vegetables, and it's just because they have more available energy. And as you might have seen as you were going through, or you've been looking at nutritional facts, that the way that we measure how much available energy that there is in a food is by looking at the calories. Now, plants aren't the only ones that can store up energy for later on. We do as well. So in animals, you'll hear of a carbohydrate called glycogen, and it kind of looks kind of like glucose, kind of, sort of. Just agree with me. Just play along. Okay. So glycogen can be broken down and converted into that glucose that we need to further process to make usable energy to stay alive. And it is stored in a couple places. It's stored in our muscles and also in our liver. Something else that's associated with carbohydrates is that carbs provide a structural support for plant cells. Now, we will talk about plant cells. Um, Plant cells, they have an additional barrier, we'll say, beyond its past, its outer, it's on the outside uh, from the cell membrane. We don't have one of those because we don't need it. We have an endoskeleton. So we have an internal skeleton. Some things have exoskeletons, like we're looking at this crab here. Now, this was actually a crab that I personally didn't catch, but that we caught, and we laid some crab pots in an immersion class that I took years ago. It's called the Chesapeake Bay Academy. So this little crab here has an exoskeleton, but plants don't have either one. They don't have an endoskeleton. They don't have an exoskeleton, but trees stand up. Blades of grass stand up. So how in the world does that happen? And it happens in large part because of the cellulose, which is a large carbohydrate. It's in a group called polysaccharides, made of many monosaccharides, are made of many sugar molecules. And it provides a kind of a support, a structure for plant cells. And you can see it here. It's kind of ginormous. It's really big. Now, something else, and I put a little picture of corn, so it might be one of your favorite starchy carbs. But something else that this cellulose does for us, these gigantic polysaccharides, that they're indigestible to humans. Um, so as we look at the flow of energy, we will identify organisms as producers or consumers. We're consumers, we eat, and then we'll go through the different types: herbivores, carnivores, omnivores. Well, that's us. So our bodies are designed to eat plant and animal matter. So something that we can't do really well or at all, we can't digest this plant material. So for us, um, it's our dietary fiber. So you might hear people saying, oh, you just need to add some fiber to your diet. And I put the corn in here. It's not the most pleasant thought in the world, but corn is definitely an example that we can think about. We can all wrap our mind around. You've all had this experience of saying, I don't remember eating corn, but you had to have eaten the corn in order for it to be in your waste products, probably about 24 hours earlier. But the reason why the corn comes back to haunt you again is that this outer part, it's got a lot of starch in it. The inside part we can digest pretty well, but the outside part, not a lot of starch, sorry, a lot of cellulose in it. The inside part, the starch we can digest, but the outside part, we're not going to be able to take care of it so well. So it will come back to haunt us. And then the last thing with the carbs here are the three different groups: monosaccharides, the one sugars, and you can see that glucose, there's our big one there, C6H12O6, and also fructose, which is fruit sugar. And then ribose, we'll see this one again and again and again. This is actually a main component of RNA, a nucleic acid. Disaccharides, two sugar molecules, so you can see them joined there. Sucrose, which is table sugar, and lactose, which is milk sugar. And some of you might know about lactose already. You might be lactose intolerant. And then polysaccharides are many sugar molecules, these big boys. So starch and glycogen, both of those for short-term energy storage. Starch, that's in those potatoes. So a lot of people are on diets. They're not going to be eating a bunch of potatoes because of those extra plant energy reserves that they don't want to be gobbling up. Glycogen, that's our temporary storage, our go-to to get some glucose out so that we can move around. And then cellulose, that is in the cell walls of plants and helps to provide extra support.